In the forest of the night? More like in the rubbish of the night. 1 episode, 2 reviews. I've never done this before, but then again, I've never done a review that so many of you disagreed with before. Before I get into it, I thought I'd take a look at what the Sun thought of the episode. Forest of the Night aired on the 25th of October, and on the 26th, here's what the Sun had to say. Raspberry or applause? I don't speak Sun. Before I get into it, a big thanks to all of you for all your comments. I'm so grateful that the discussion of my videos is an active, literate, civilized, thoughtful, respectful corner of the internet. Your comments raised so many objections and pointed out so many flaws in this episode. I gave the show another look. I looked deeper into the science, and I borrowed a lot of the ideas for this second review from you. So thanks to all of you for helping me to write it. Table of contents. The science, Mr. Pink, Mave, here, Clara, and the doctor. Let's go. The science. This will be the biggest part of it. Yeah, it was awful again. But come on, it's Doctor Who. And in case you haven't noticed, the Doctor only pretends to be a scientific genius. He's actually a fictional character who exists in a fantasy universe. It's a universe governed not by laws of physics, chemistry, and biology, but by the whims of the writers. He's Dumbledore with a metal and plastic wand instead of one made of elder wood with a thestral tail hair at the core. Sometimes I think we just need to chill and stop critiquing the science, because there is no science. So let's just be entertained, get used to it. No, I can't get used to it. I'm going to go deeper into the science and the history. I found some interesting stuff. Care to come along? Spoilers! Crisis of the week was the sudden appearance of a global forest. As you know, if you watched, it turned out that the trees weren't a threat at all, unless you happen to be Nelson's column. Good taste. Sorry. The trees, according to what Dr. Idiot discovered, his name, not mine, I'm going to keep using that name every time the science is bad. The trees were actually meant to shield the Earth from the real threat, which he discovered thanks to a crude drawing by a psychic schoolgirl. The real threat was a giant coronal mass ejection, a CME, about to erupt from the sun. We get bad science folded into worse science with a dollop of good science thrown in by happy, ignorant accident, and then even that gets smothered with more bad science. I'm going to explain it all. Doctor says it's happened before, and he cites 2 occasions. The Tunguska event of 1908 over Siberia and the Karasa River event of 1930 over Brazil. I went and looked them up. Turns out those were not solar events at all. Those were both large meteors that heated up by the friction of passing through the atmosphere and exploded with the force of multi-megaton bombs. We have only Dr. Idiot's word that things might have been even worse but for the magic forest. But how could he know that? He had never even heard of the magic forest before now. How did he calculate its ameliorative impact on past events? 0 evidence. So the 2 events that the doctor chose to cite were not massive solar storms. I wonder why he didn't mention the Carrington event, which was one. I'll get to that. What do we see in the show? A tongue of fire from the sun leaping across space, threatening to burn the Earth. And how did the trees shield us? By pumping extra oxygen into the atmosphere to burn it off, Dr. Idiot says. There goes the planet-sized airbag. That's the trees harvesting the solar fire. Where to start? First of all, a coronal mass ejection, or CME, is not fire. It's invisible. Are the writers conflating CMEs with solar flares, which are visibly seething leaps and loops of plasma from the solar miasma? A CME travels outward through the solar system, but a solar flare doesn't get that far from the surface. They come nowhere near our planet, and they won't until the sun goes all kablooey 5 billion years from now and grows to a red giant and swallows up all the inner planets. You set your clock for that one and remember to wear something cool that morning. A solar flare can trigger or be associated with a CME, a coronal mass ejection, but they're not the same thing. A CME is high energy, but it's not fire. It's invisible. It's a shower of charged particles, electrons, and positive ions. It messes with the Earth's magnetic field. It can cause some heating in the upper atmosphere, and it has other effects. I'll talk about those, but it's not going to burn us. Some history. For a few days, as August rolled over to September in 1859, instruments at Greenwich Observatory tracking the Earth's magnetic field started going waka 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 waka. This is the record made at the British Geological Survey back then. What else happened during that time? Well, spectacular displays of Aurora Borealis over places that normally don't see them, including New Orleans and Hawaii. I'll link to a page of newspaper accounts from the time. The auroras glowed brighter than the moon. Some were bright enough to read by. But there was more to this than a light show. Here's what else happened. Telegraph lines began to spark. Some operators had shocks and burns from touching their keys. Telegraph paper caught fire. Some telegraph offices caught fire. They disconnected the batteries, and they were still enough charged to send messages. Very mysterious. But something happened on the sun just before all this happened on Earth. How do we know? Two people saw it happen. Two English astronomers, Richard Hodgson and Richard Carrington, separately and simultaneously observing the sun from two different buildings. But they spotted something no one had ever noticed before. Intense bright flares on the sun, right in the middle of a darker sunspot. Carrington had rigged a telescope to project an 11-inch image of the face of the sun onto a screen. Every day he would make meticulous drawings of what he saw. It was an ongoing project to observe the rotation of the sun by tracking the progression of sunspots day by day. At 11 a.m. on September 1st, Carrington and Hodgson both were startled to notice intense, unprecedented bright white lights in the middle of a dark sunspot, the first known observation of a solar flare. Carrington was first to make the connection. Maybe the flare had something to do with the wacky magnetic storm. And because he made the connection, the whole incident was named for him, the Carrington event. Sorry, Hodgson, you're a footnote. That was the first connection made between weather on the sun and magnetic storms on Earth. And indeed, the sun was making things burn on the Earth, but not the way Dr. Idiot suggested. The burning came from sparks in the telegraph system, caused by the magnetic disturbance. An oxygen-rich atmosphere would have made those fires worse, not better. I mentioned there was some accidental good science, and here it is. One effect of a solar storm is increased radiation. It doesn't reach the surface because it's absorbed by our atmosphere. We're protected. So maybe, theoretically, if we expect a huge surge of radiation from the sun, putting more atmosphere around the planet might offer more protection. Except for one thing. Remind yourself how trees generate oxygen. They make it from carbon dioxide and water. Here's the formula. You start with carbon dioxide and water, you shuffle the atoms, you wind up with sugar and oxygen. So they aren't actually making new atmosphere. They're taking one component, carbon dioxide, out of the atmosphere and releasing a different component, oxygen, into it. By the way, if you have a fire going and you want to put it out, you don't add oxygen to it. That just makes it burn faster, brighter, and hotter. You might add carbon dioxide. So these trees had it completely backwards, and Dr. Idiot fell for it. Enough science. Let's talk about Mr. Danny Pink. Danny Pink is presented as the hero teacher. He's the one focused on the children, keeping them safe, singularly concerned with returning them to their parents. And yet, with a very small group of students, he actually managed to misplace one of them. He didn't even use standard techniques like calling roll, pairing kids up in buddies. There's a show to put on, there's drama. All that would have slowed the action. But another thing you pointed out to me, Pink was pretty handsy with those kids. Not in a way previous generations would find inappropriate, just a gentle guiding hand on the shoulder and back as they walked. But in today's atmosphere, aren't teachers advised never to do any touching? More fundamentally, why wasn't his first priority to let all the parents know that their kids were safe? A memory. October 17th, 1989, 5:04 p.m. I'm at work in an office near San Francisco. A pretty big earthquake hits, and once our building stopped shaking and we knew we were all right, everybody's first impulse was to phone family, be sure they're okay, let them know you're okay. Why didn't Danny do that? Why wasn't every child given the chance to phone home? Why didn't all the kids have their phones start ringing? Danny is supposed to be the one who's focused on the kids. Oh, never mind that. It would slow down the story. Mave. Let's talk about Mave. I'm going to start with the girl's name. I got that wrong last time, and I'm sorry. It's Mave, as each one of these loyal viewers took the time to remind me, and I thank you all. I listened to the program again. Every actor who says her name pronounces it very clearly and distinctly. Don't know how I got it wrong. Well, for one thing, I've never known anybody named Mave. I lead a sheltered life. For another, I guess I'm visually dominant. I turned on closed captioning and saw it spelled, and my reader's brain just wiped out my listener's brain. If only they had spelled it like Dave. But no, it's spelled like Mave. What's her story? Unpacking it. A year ago, her sister went missing. Why? How? Never explained. Runaway? Accident? Abduction? Join the circus? Don't know. Young Mave is sensitized, tuned in, searching for Sister Annabelle. Puts her in a mentally receptive mode, and without her actually comprehending it, she begins catching thoughts from an invisible force, a set of beings. She doesn't know them as creatures, only as thoughts that come to her. Who are these creatures? Well, the doctor sonics up some extra gravity and forces them to become visible, although that's apparently painful to them, and they find a voice through Mave and tell us, "We are here." Not clear if here is who they are or where they are, or both, but "We are here." Last week it was the boneless, this week it's the here. How long have you been here? We were here before you. And how long are you planning to stay? We will be here after you. Doctor's never met them before. Who are you again? Here. Where are you? Here. And they are apparently connected to plant life because they say, "We are the green shoots that grow between the cracks and the grass that grows over the mass graves." Oh, so they know about our graves, huh? They are paying attention to humans then.
After your wars are over, we will still be here.
Wars, huh? So they definitely do have our number. Somehow, the one girl who's attuned to hear here just happens to be a student of a companion of the doctor. That seems to be a coincidence, because the here didn't send her to get the doctor. Mave thinks maybe Clara did, but Clara was in the museum. She didn't know anything about the forest. Odd. Here's the weird way the Mave story ends. The last sequence in the show. Mave's missing sister, Annabelle, turns up. Why? How? Why now? Where's she been? We never find out, and we end on Annabelle's smile. Not a very satisfying story arc. Has it ever happened that Doctor Who ended the show with a close-up of someone we've never seen before, who wasn't even in the story, who wasn't a continuing character, like Missy? Here's the biggest problem with this episode, and many of you raised it, as did other reviewers. What's the point? Suppose Mave had never been involved. Suppose Danny and Clara had never been involved. Suppose the Doctor had never been involved. In this story, the outcome would have been the same, wouldn't it? Solar eruption, planet-sized airbag, here, everything's fine. One thing, the Doctor arranges for Mave to do some outbound telemarketing, uses the TARDIS to connect her mobile phone to every phone on the planet, to warn people not to harm the trees. You know, because those unsolicited phone calls we get from numbers that we don't recognize, we always pay attention to them. We always listen to them. On to Clara's story. This was very consequential. Before Dr. Idiot figured out that the forest would save the Earth, everyone thought the planet was doomed. We're all going to die. Clara tricks him into getting back to the TARDIS and tells him to go. Save yourself. The TARDIS is your lifeboat. Forget this women and children first nonsense. The captain goes up with the ship. Clara's resolved to go down with the planet. She didn't want to be the last of her kind. Sweet? Noble? Selfish? Weird? What kind of a fatalistic choice was that for Clara? Where's your fight, Clara? You were so feisty all season. You saved the moon. You helped defeat the mummy. You helped defeat the boneless. Now you're giving up, accepting death calmly like Leonardo DiCaprio in the Titanic. Let's look at the Doctor, Dr. Idiot. He's not entirely sure his theory about the trees is right, but he takes Clara up in the TARDIS anyway. So if he turned out to be wrong and the Earth was incinerated, well, he had just invalidated Clara's choice, didn't he? One final note. Even focused on all those science goofs, plot holes, character inconsistencies, when I rewatched the episode, I was still totally charmed. I really liked it, still. Despite everything, despite your objections, despite my objections, I still buy it, hook, line, and sinker. I can't argue with feelings, can't argue with jokes. It's a good episode, a really good episode. Until next time, I'm Mickeleh. DVD extras. 2 years ago, a huge CME reached Earth's orbit. Fortunately, our planet was in a different part of the orbit and we missed it, but one of our satellites was up and took the full brunt of it. We've been analyzing the data ever since. Today, we know more about CMEs than ever before. Here's what those 1859 magnetic tracings actually look like as they're preserved. I'll link you to them so you can study them for yourself if you have a mind to. Side note, in 1859, the global information superhighway consisted of a network of telegraph lines, 40,000 miles worth in the U.S. alone. Beyond that, and some magnetic compasses that went awry, there wasn't a lot that was vulnerable to a CME. Today, however, look how vulnerable we are. The solar storm that missed us 2 years ago, a Carrington-style event, would disrupt communications, banking, your credit card, transportation, the electrical grid, your sat-nav, emergency response services, government services, not to mention Facebook, Twitter, and Vine. One estimate says if a solar storm as large as the Carrington event hit our modern world, it would cause $2 trillion in damage. That's an economic impact equivalent to 20 Hurricane Katrinas. Here's a weird coincidence. Beginning just before the air date and continuing all through this week, Earth has been experiencing an actual CME, Coronal Mass Ejection. And there have been daily warnings about disruptions that include power grid variations, Aurora, radio blackouts, and risks to our satellites. There's also an outbreak of solar flares, huge ones, but fortunately, they do not seem to be spewing CMEs. Where's the here when you need them? Not here, apparently. But where was the here when the dinosaurs needed them? Here's a short playlist. Video from NASA about coronal mass ejections, and the revised song about Why the Sun Shines from TMBG. They might be giants. And I'll throw in the original, too. And here is my good review of this episode. Bye now.